Last week, we started this new series called Crazy Like Us. And I got to admit, this series is a little tricky because the goal of this series is for us to teach you to do something that you probably think you already do. And the goal of this series is for us to teach you to be something that you probably think you already are. And that is to be generous. Now, I don't know about you, but there's not much that is more offensive than whenever someone accuses you of not being something you know that you are. Right? They're like, oh, you just don't love people. And you're like, all I do is love people. You jerk face. Right? You ever felt that way? It's like, that is not fair for you to make that statement. All I do is love people. It's offensive. In fact, one email that I got earlier this week after last week's message was this. Hey, man, listen, I got to tell you, I love the church, and I'll be back right after this series is over. I know, but I didn't even know what to say. I was just like, okay. And so some of you were here last week, and you've come back to be offended again. I got to admit, I'm impressed. Others of you, though, you're here for the first time today. And if that's the case, then I want you to know, listen, it's going to be okay. All right, deep breath. We're going to make it through because ultimately this series is more about something that God wants for you than it is about something that God wants from you. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, you're not a Christian, you're just kind of checking this stuff out, I want you to know it's going to be okay too. I'm not going to ask anything from you. In fact, we built this place for you. Like we created this church for people just like you because we want everybody to be able to make a connection to God. And we think everybody's life is better when you do that. So no worries, no stress. It's going to be all right. No Kool-Aid. We're going to make it through this thing together. But we are going to talk about it because it's important. It's very important. All right. Now here's the thing about the series as we jump in. Truth is, we all think we're generous. We do. We think that we're generous. And part of the reason why we all think that we're generous is because we're all pretty good at doing one particular thing. And I want to tell you what that thing is. The reason that most of us think that we're generous, even though we're not, is because we're really good at giving to some things sometimes. We just are. It's like cultural. We're really good at giving to some things sometimes. You're checking out at Wawa and the person says, hey, would you like to donate $1 to Breast Cancer Awareness Month? Yeah, I'll do that. Why? I'm generous. I'll do that. I'm glad to do that, right? Right? You go to restaurants, it's time for the tip. You give 20% automatically. You don't even think about it. You start there, right? And you're like, even you push it a little more. Some of you are like, you don't push it that far, right? But you think, I'm a good tipper. I'm generous, right? Whenever the kid shows up at your door with that overpriced candy bar, right? And he's like, hey, you want to buy it? You don't even know what the cause is. You're like, sure, kid, I'll take 3. Why? Because I'm generous. I kid you not. My wife and I and the kids and my mom, we were all out at, I think it was Lowe's or Home Depot. We walk outside and there's some Boy Scouts there. And I was a Boy Scout, soft spot in my heart. I walk over. They're selling popcorn. I'm like, how expensive could popcorn be? Kid you not. I look on the table, there's a plethora of options, and I find the teeniest, tiniest little bag of popcorn I could find. I said, I want that one. Is that big? He goes, $10. I said, $10, but I didn't have the heart. I already picked it up. I didn't have the heart to be like, no. I'm going to need the as-is section. Where's the already open popcorn? This is not okay. $10 for that much popcorn. And so my mom bought it, and I ate it. So that's how that went down. So I had fun telling that story. I lost my place. Give me a second. We'll edit this out. I'm getting there. Oh, there we go. Right? So we do things like that, and we think that we're generous, right? Because we're good at giving to some things sometimes. Now sometimes we give to some big things too, right? Like the church has a need or something we're involved in, some nonprofit, they have a need, they let us know what's going on. We're like, yeah, sure, I'll give a couple $100 to that. Perfect example of this, every year we have what we call a year-end offering. And a year-end offering is an opportunity for us to be able to, as a church, to end the year strong and start the new year in a good position, right? And so we talk about that. We talk about what's happened in the past year and all God has done. And we're like, man, it's been great. And, we want to make sure we end strong, start strong, and, give everybody an opportunity to give to that. And so we want to make sure we're doing mailings this next year and make sure we're still doing the projects that we want to do. And here's what we have planned. And we let you guys know all those things. And lots of you give to that. Lots of you give something sometimes like to that type of a thing. It's like this random act of giving. And it's good. Lots of you would say, I'm going to give $500 to that, right? This is my church. It's a big deal. In fact, the way we say it in our family, and we've done this every year, we say that for us, we're going to make sure that our biggest and best Christmas gift that we give is the one that we give to Jesus, because it's his birthday. Right? It's his birthday, right? If it's not your birthday, we get all the presents, but it's his birthday. It's like, what is that about, right? So we say we're going to use this as an opportunity to push God's thing forward, right? To get behind the church. And so we do that every year. And so many of you say, I'm going to give $5,000 or I'm going to give $1,000. And it's a great thing. And it's a good thing. Nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. Another example of this is if like maybe they're taking a collection up at the office for somebody's family that's gone through something difficult or a hard time. You're like, yeah, I'll give $50 to that, right? You know, I'll give $25 or $75 to that. And you give, and it's okay. It's like this random act of giving. And what we learned last week, though, is that there's a difference between a random act of giving and being a generous person. There is. There's a difference between a random act of giving and being a generous person. Here's the deal. Generosity is more than random acts of giving. Generosity is more than random acts of giving. Random acts of giving are great. Now, don't get me wrong, right? Don't stop doing those things. You should do those things. But if you're a follower of Jesus, you are called by God to actually do something even better than that. And that is to be generous. And here's our working definition of generosity. Here's what it means to be generous. Generosity is pre-deciding that you're going to consistently give a certain percentage of your money away to God and for other people. That's what generosity is. Generosity is pre-deciding that you'll consistently give a certain percentage of your money away to serve God and to serve other people. And so here's something that's really cool about being a generous person. Generous people don't give because they feel guilted into giving, right? That's not why generous people give. They give because they decided way before anybody gave them a pitch or said, hey, here's something worthwhile. They decided way before that they were going to be generous people. That's the reason why they give. Get this, generous people don't give because of what they'll get if they give, right? You ever heard that one? If you give God $1, he'll give you 10, right? You know what that is? That's a bribe. That's how that works. Like that's a bribe. You give God $100, he'll give you 1,000. It's like, just cough. Just go ahead, cough. It's a bribe. Now, listen, don't get me wrong. Yes, I do think that doing money God's way does invite God to be part of that area of your life. Absolutely. Honoring him in that way, it does invite God into that area of your life. But that's not why generous people give. Generous people don't give because of what they'll get in return. Generous people have already pre-decided that they'll consistently give a certain percentage of their money away to serve God and to serve other people. And so you hear a definition like that, and maybe you say, that's great for all those generous people. If that's what generosity is, they can have it. But maybe you might ask, why should I care? Like, why should I care about this? Why should I care about this series? Why should I care about maybe taking a step toward generosity? Here's a couple of reasons. Number one, when you become generous, you'll give more, you'll save more, and you'll consume less. You'll give more, you'll save more, and you'll consume less. The only real exception to this is the small percentage of you that have hoarded all of your money and now you've got a big bank account balance but no peace, right? And that's a slither. Somebody like, I'd love to have that problem. I will take that no peace. Big bank account balance, no peace. Yes, sign me up. I would like that, right? And so if that's you, then let me talk to you for a second, because if you would take a step toward generosity, then you would give more. You'd actually save less because you've over-saved, which I didn't even know that was a thing, but that's a thing. You would also consume less, but here's I think is the kicker. If you take a step toward generosity, you'd be happier. You'd be happier. Jesus actually said that. He said it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. Whenever he said that, he wasn't saying that whenever you give, then you're going to feel better than when you receive. Because I don't know if you've ever kind of tested that. I feel pretty good both times. Like, I feel good when I receive. I'm like, that was nice. I kind of enjoyed. I mean, I was nice to give, but it was nice to receive. And if I'm honest, I kind of liked it better when I received. And so I don't really know what Jesus was talking about when he said it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. But what Jesus was saying was this, that the person who gives, whenever you organize your whole financial world around being generous, then you'll be blessed. And that word blessed isn't God's going to do something for you as much as you'll be happy. Blessed is the man. Happy is the man, right? Who's generous. That's what that means. Listen, practically speaking, the most generous people you know are the happiest people you know. They are. And the happiest people you know, it's likely they're the most generous people that you know. Now, listen, if I told you that there was a pill that you could take and then 10 years from now, you will have given more, you will have saved more, and you will have consumed less, and you would be happier, would you take that pill? Yeah, you take that pill. We'd all take that pill, right? So those are good reasons, but there's a third reason, and this is the one I want to spend most of our time on talking about today, all right? Here it is. When you become a generous person, you'll get off the crazy train of worry and discontentment. When you become a generous person, you'll get off the crazy train of worry and discontentment. Now, before you pull yourself out of the scenario and say, oh, that's not me, I am not on the crazy train, let me tell you this about the crazy train. 90% of the people in the room that you're in with right now are on that crazy train with you. 90%. So maybe you probably don't be too quick to put yourself in 10%, all right? 90%. And you're like, where did you get that percentage? I just made it up, but it's probably true. I believe 90% of people are on the crazy train. So let me draw it for you because here's what the crazy train looks like, all right? Little crowd participation. What do you think is the emotion or the feeling that most people have or most people associate whenever they think about money? What do you think that feeling is? I heard it's close to stress. What? Yeah, worry. There it is, worry. So let's. There it is. It's worry. Most of us on some level have some worry when it comes to money, right? We worry if we're ever going to have enough to do the things we need to do. We worry if we're ever going to have enough to do the things we want to do. We worry if we're ever going to have enough to put a ring on it. It's like, I like it. I'd like to put a ring on it. Can't afford a ring, right? We worry if we're ever going to have enough to get married. We worry if we're ever going to have enough to replace the car, right? It's making all kinds of noises. Just turn the radio up so I don't have to listen to it. But eventually, that thing is going to die. And you're like, I got to replace this car, right? We worry if we're going to have the money to do that. We worry if we're ever going to have enough money to buy a house. We worry if we're ever going to be able to have enough money to save some. We worry if we're ever going to have enough money to be able to get ahead some, right? And eventually we start to worry if we're ever going to have enough money to retire. And so on it goes. We worry on some level. Most of us worry when it comes to money. And so because we're worried, what we do is we wait until we've saved enough money to do all those things that we're worried about, right? Before we actually go do them. Isn't that what we do? No, that is not what we do. We don't wait and save. You know what we do? We worry so much, we convince ourselves that we need to spend everything we have and even more than what we have so that we don't have to worry so much, right? So that looks like this. Spend more or equal to what we make. Right? I'm so worried. I'm not going to be able to get a ring. And so I'm going to go finance it. I'm going to go put it on a card. I'm going to go borrow the money from somebody and just try to avoid them. Right? So this worry leads to us making this decision where we spend more or spend what we make in order to alleviate that worry. Well, if you spend more than you make or spend everything you make and you start to put and finance things and all that kind of stuff, that leads to something else. What's that lead to? There it is. Debt. Leads to debt. We got all this debt. Now, debt comes with something that's fun. It's called a bill. Right? And it's got this thing called interest. And so now you've taken this limited pool of money that you didn't have enough of in the first place, right, that you're all worried about, and you couldn't wait to save up, so you went and financed it, spent more than you make or equal to what you make, and now you've got some debt, and now they're putting interest on top of it, and now you got this bill that you got to pay, and you don't have enough money to do that, right, because it's like this crazy cycle, and that leads to something where you've got more and more bills, they keep getting higher and higher, and now you've got no margin. No margin. You've got no margin. Let me tell you something I know. When you look at your financial picture and you have no margin, you know what you have? Something to worry about. Isn't it true? If you have no margin, you, my friend, have something to worry about. And so what do? Do you save till you can take care of that worry? No. You go, it's like, I got to work this out. I go beg, borrow, steal, do something, move something from this thing to that thing and this thing over here. We're going to work this thing out, right? And then you end up spending more or equal to what you make, which leads to more debt, which leads to no margin. If you got no margin, then you really got something to worry about, right? And then you're like, I got to do something about this. So you go and you spend more than you make or equal to what you make, and that leads to more debt, which leads to no margin, which leads to worry. You know what this is? This is the crazy train. You know what else this is? The American way. This, we're just going to do cray-cray. Cray-cray train. Woo-woo. It's crazy. But we buy that ticket, don't we? It's crazy. But we buy that ticket. Here's a question. What has to change in order for you to be able to get off the crazy train? What is the change? What would be a solution? More money? Right? I heard it up here. Get a better job. More money. No. No, you know how I know more money wouldn't fix it? You had the same problem when you were 22, when you turned 32. You're probably going to have the same problem when you're 42. And you make more money now than you've ever made in your whole life, and you still have the same problem. Right? More money isn't going to fix it, because you make more money, you're just going to spend more money. It's the American way. It's the cray-cray train. You're just going to spend more money. Listen, I know people who make six figures who are more worried about money than they've ever been in their entire life. Ever. In their whole life. The truth is that there are people who make 2 and 3 times what you make, and they are absolutely terrified about their financial picture. Terrified about their financial situation. In fact, there's a famous theologian, famous poet that put it this way. Here's what he said. He said, more money, more problems. It's Biggie. So real quick, let me tell you why we end up on the crazy train, right? It's not because we don't make enough money. It's because you and I buy into the assumption that it's all for our consumption. That's what it is. It's a mindset. We buy into the assumption that it's all for our consumption. We assume that everything we make is for us to consume. And listen, if that's how you think, it doesn't matter how much money you ever make. You'll always be worried because you'll always stay on the cray-cray train. It's true. Guess who doesn't do this? Just take a stab at it. Just a wild guess. Guess who are some of the only people who don't stay on the crazy train? Just guess. Just generous people. Generous people, you know why? Because they think different. They don't assume that it's all for them to consume. See, we look at generosity. We look at other people's choice to say, I'm going to give away a certain percentage of my money consistently to serve God and other people. And we go, that's crazy. Listen, this is crazy. This is crazy. And generosity might be crazy, but it's a better kind of crazy. It is a better kind of crazy. If I assume that it's all for me to consume, then Jesus actually has a word for me, and it's not a good word. And I'm going to tell you what it is, but remember, I didn't say it, Jesus said it. I know. For our other locations, someone just stood up, walked out. They just said, that's it, you're bringing Jesus into it. I can't. They didn't walk out. I'm just a joke. You want to know what the word is? Here it is. Greedy. I know, right? If you assume that it's all for you to consume, that everything you make is for your consumption now or your consumption later, like put it in the bank, I'll just consume it later, or put it there for me later. If you assume it's all for your consumption, then Jesus has a word for that. It's greedy. Now here's the problem with greed. Greed is hard to see when you're looking in the mirror. It just is. Like no one's ever come up to me and said, Kent, we need to talk. I'm just so greedy. I've never had that conversation, not one time. Not one time. So I say, hey, can we meet? I just want to talk about it. I'm just so greedy. That's never happened. We all think we're generous, but we're not. Like we don't see ourselves as greedy because that's not how we define it. But Jesus taught that it doesn't matter how much you make or how much you don't make. You can be greedy. And it doesn't matter how much you have or how much you don't have. You can be generous. Has nothing to do with the amount. Has everything to do with what you do with what you have. It determines whether you're a generous or a greedy person, right? Now, I want to give you some good news about greed. There's an antidote. There is a kryptonite. It's generosity. Generosity breaks the back of greed in our hearts. Generosity is the thing that breaks the back of greed in our life. In Luke chapter 12, Jesus actually talks about this. And in talking about this, he goes on to explain it by sharing a parable. And a parable is just a made-up story in order to make a point. And so I want to read this portion of scripture to you, and we'll land on a couple things. Here we go. Luke chapter 12, verse 15. It says, then he said to them, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of, there's our word, right? Greed. And then look at the statement he says after that. He says, a man's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions. A man's life doesn't consist of the abundance of his possessions. He says, hey, there's more to life than just consuming a bunch of stuff. In fact, you need to make sure that you're careful that you don't fall into the trap of believing that life is about consuming everything you can now and setting aside a bunch of it so that you can consume it later. Because that's not what life is about. I mean, you want to really live, that's not life. And then he goes on to tell the story. Here's the story. Here's the parable. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. And so even 2,000 years ago, the rich are getting richer. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Like, what am I going to do with it all? Verse 18. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I'll store all my surplus grain. Listen, don't miss this. You know what he did? He did what he always had done. He assumed that it was all for him to consume. And he came up with a solution. He's like, hey, if I can't consume it all right now, I'll just build a bigger barn so I can consume it all later. He assumed that it was all for him to consume. He built bigger barns. Verse 19, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. This guy is living the dream. I mean, he's a farmer. He's out there farming. I'm sure he's singing to himself. He's singing, I want to be a billionaire, oh, so bad. Buy all of the things I never had. Want to be on the cover of Forbes magazine, standing next to Oprah and the Queen, right? Yeah. Like he's singing to himself. He has this big crop, and then boom, he's on the magazine with Oprah and the Queen. Like, but it happened, right? He's a huge success. In fact, if we were limited to one word to describe him, isn't that the one we'd use? Isn't it? We'd be like, oh, that guy, he's successful, right? Yet the scripture goes on to tell us that God uses a completely different word for him. Verse 20, but God said to him, you fool. Right? Anybody else surprised? Like, what you mean, fool? Like, I had a good crop. Like, I was successful. I made money. I did well. What do you mean, fool? I'm not a fool. I'm successful. I'm not a fool. I'm blessed of God. I'm not a fool. Publishing companies are running to me to get me to write a book about how successful I was. And if he wrote that book, we don't go buy it because we want to be just like him, right? We want to have to build bigger barns. Don't miss this. He's not a fool because he was successful, and he's not a fool because he was rich. He's a fool because he was confused. He assumed that it was all for him to consume. He assumed that it was all for him to consume. Verse 20, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. In other words, he says, hey, you're going to run out of time before you run out of stuff. And then he asks him this question, and I think by asking this question, he's asking the people he's talking to, and he's telling the story, and I think he's asking me and you too. Here's the question he asks this guy. He says, then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? You build a bigger barn. You saved it all. Who's going to get what you've saved when your time runs out? Who's going to get it? You know what the answer to that question is for all of us? Somebody else. Like somebody else going to get all your stuff. And not because we chose to be generous, but because we died. Isn't that lame? Like we had no hand in it. It's just like, you're dead. You know, I kind of like this jacket. I'm like, what? Leave my jacket alone. This has become very real to me recently because many of you know my father passed away this past summer, and so we've been dealing with all of his stuff. And you know, we've sold some things, we've given some things away, we've given some things to friends and family, we've donated some things, we've just thrown some stuff away. I mean, just all this stuff, and I found myself like looking at all this stuff, like, what do we do with all this stuff? It's just a lot of stuff. But isn't it true for us too? Like, I look at all that stuff and I start thinking about all my stuff. I'm like, what? Why do I even have that still? What am I doing with that? I should do something good with that. It's just sitting in a corner, right? And it's true for us. Somebody else is going to get all of our stuff. That car that you love, gone. That collection that you labored over amassing, gone. The purses that you adore, they're gone. I heard a story about a man who told his wife, he said, listen, honey, I'm taking all the money out of the bank. She's like, why? He says, well, I'm going to take our life savings and I'm going to put it in a suitcase. And I'm going to put the suitcase in the attic. And then one day, when I die, I'm going to grab the suitcase on my way to heaven. So sure enough, the man died. The first thing she did was run to the attic. She wanted to see, is it still there? Climbed the stairs, looked, and there it was, suitcase still sitting there in the attic. She thought to herself, I knew I should have told him to put it in the basement. Hey, it don't matter where you go, you can't take it with you. Right? You cannot take it with you. Someone's going to get all your stuff. Jesus said, hey, all the stuff that you prepared for yourself, don't you realize it's a total loss? And here's why. You've assumed that it was all for you to consume, but it wasn't. You believed the lie that life consists of the abundance of your possessions. You lived under the assumption that it was all for your consumption, but it wasn't. It's not. I've called you to a better thing than that. Well, if it's not for me, then who's it for? He answers that question over in verse 21. I love this because it's as if Jesus pulls out of the story and looks every single one of these people gathered around in the eye. And I think he looks down through history and looks us in the eye as well. And then here's what he says. This is how it will be. Did you get that? This is how it will be. Future tense. For all of you and everybody else down through history, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves. Right? He says, hey, the lesson we learned from this guy is that it was a total loss. It's going to be a total loss for people who just store up things for themselves because they're under the assumption that it's all for them, all for their consumption. It's going to be a total loss for those who are not, who's it for? Rich toward God. And like I said, God didn't call the man a fool because he was rich. God was the one who made him richer. He was a farmer. You know who's in charge of the rain and the weather and the sun? You know who does all that? Yeah, God does that. God's the one who does that. He controls all that. He made this man have the crop that he had. And gang, whenever we think to ourselves that it's all for our consumption, when we're under the assumption that it's all for our consumption, when we believe the lie that it's for us just to get a better and better cell phone and a nicer car and a bigger house and a nicer clothes, and we're in danger of playing the part of the fool. And I'm not saying that any of those things are bad. I'm just saying that they could be if you're under the assumption it's all for your consumption, if you're not being generous. Listen, God has called you to a greater purpose than that. God has called you to a grander thing than that. God's called you, every single one of us. Well, those of us that are followers of Jesus have taken that step. God has called you to be rich toward God, which begs the question, how do you be rich toward God? I'm going to tell you next week. I'm going to tell you next week. Next week, we're going to get incredibly pragmatic. It's going to be super helpful. But you got to be here. Here's what I want you to take away from today. Generous people don't assume that it's all for them to consume. It's a mindset. And here's the thing, if you move into next week and you get all the tips and tricks and say, okay, I'm going to do this and I want to be a generous person, you start doing all that, but you don't change your mindset, if you still start to believe it's all for you, you're under the assumption it's all for your consumption, then you'll move back to the crazy train. You will. I really believe God's called us to a different kind of crazy, a better kind of crazy, a crazy that makes a difference in people's lives, makes a difference in this world, a crazy that will cause you to save more, consume less, give more, a crazy that will actually make you happier. The kind of crazy that take you off the cray-cray train to a better, grander thing. So, you in with me? Yeah, we're going to keep taking steps together? Yeah. We've got to stop believing the lie or assume that it's all for us to consume. God's got a better plan than that. Yeah? Amen. Deal. Cool. Let me pray for you. God, I thank you for every person here. I pray your blessing in their life. I pray to give us the wisdom to know what to do with what we just heard and the courage to do it. In Jesus' name, amen.